So, finally, I managed to find someone who was willing to do a video on this one, and I have a Rivet over here. He's from Prime Family, and from my understanding, he's the person doing training of people in the Prime Family and event organization. So, Rivet, if I missed something, would you care to elaborate? Did I get everything correct? Is there something else to mention?
Yeah, so I've been in the game for about 2 and a bit years, and yeah, I do look after a fair bit around the family. I look around after pretty much most of our alliances. I'm kind of present through all of them. I think I started sort of in a more junior sort of place in the family, where I was helping making sure events finished and stuff. And obviously, as I've climbed the war ladder and become more comfortable in war, now do a lot of war training across the family. I do a lot of the war leadership in the family as well in top wars. So in tier 1 wars, generally we have processes, etc. People who watch replays and help players figure out what's going on when they drop, etc. Or look out for things that defenders have are trying to surprise us with. So I do get involved in quite war, and I think it's not just work. I think it's also just joy. Like I think there's an element of me that's very nerdy, and I like the nerdy aspects of war. What are people trying to do on defense? What combats have they equipped to those? And then sometimes people don't realize, for example, afterwards, like I dropped because of this, and like no one kind of really knows why. And you look more carefully and you go, there's a combat setup that you've missed or a core setup, and then so that's kind of more of a function of, I guess, really enjoying the game, and part of enjoying the game is the more nerdy aspects of it, which is, I think, why you've come to have a chat with me as well. So yeah, so that's kind of my involvement, I think, and it probably reflects where I like the game. I think the game's very technical.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
there's been a few evolutions that make it a little less technical in terms of a large area of damage that we've seen in the last probably 6 to 12 months that mean that players start to understand or care what certain prime cores are doing, because all of a sudden you can wipe a whole area with Leo Prime or Optimal Optimus, and all of a sudden, like, oh, I don't need to understand that. But every so often, a player gets caught out, and it's because they don't really understand that technical aspect of the prime cores and how they interact with certain bots as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right about this, and I feel in a very similar manner. I've been a gamer for pretty much all my life, and I've used to play MMORPGs a lot, and there is a lot of also technicalities there as well. I try to master all the different roles in certain games, like for example, Elder Scrolls Online, World of Warcraft, things like that, nerdy things. So yeah, I do enjoy the same things as well, and I try to also, be creative with certain builds to min-max certain things, which is something that we'll get to now that we will talk about the Prime cores, because I think I've kind of seeing more potential in some things that I'm seeing in the competitive scene. So I would like to also talk with you about this and get your opinion on that as well. So let me just pull up the screen over here, and let me just slide. Let me actually a little bit minimize, because I want to I want to try fit into the screen both the app and okay. I think this will work. Okay, so let's go into alphabetical order. So I like to go with the Alpha Trion core. Now, it's a core that gives 1 energy every 8.5 seconds at max level. So I feel like that can be very valuable from the point that you can only get so much energy by destroying buildings, and this one just gives you energy by being in battle. So, how do you feel about it?
I think Alpha Trion Core is a no-brainer for me. It's the ability points is part of what makes the game fun, right? So if you're going to play this game, you want as many ability points possible. Partly because you're using abilities. If we were literally just going to sort of brute force a base and just use DPS and tanks and heal, it wouldn't be as fun. Half of it is using the combos, etc. So you want points available to you, and I think it's actually one of the ones that I've often surprisingly forgotten by
Yeah,
players because it's not as sexy. It doesn't sound
yeah,
offensive direct initially, and then you go, who do I put it on, etc. And it's also tricky because if you put in a squishy bot, then you lose the benefit of it fairly early. So your planning around who has it is quite important. But I do 100% think it's a very important prime core. It's the whole engine of the game is based on special abilities. Be a lot less interesting without. And the amount of times you see players in the end game of a war where they need a couple more points and they get the points just to either do a pipes rush or a rook decoy pop to distract the opposing titan, right? Those things that make a little bit of difference, right, in the end game of the battle. that's where Alpha Trion comes in. Because you're at that point of the battle where you're almost timing out and you're worried, like, where are your points coming from? You need a bit of heal, you need a bit of pipes to distract the Titans. If it's the acid, for example, from Nemesis Arc, right? That stops your healing, right? If it's hitting pipes, though, it doesn't matter. Pipes has a shield on him. And Alpha Trion gives you those points, and it's part of what makes pipes really useful, because he's so low on cost. Like, you +1 and
Yeah.
you basically have 12 seconds of distracted Titan. So for me, like, Alpha Trion's a no-brainer. I think that it's very hard to run a war team successfully. Like, it can be done, and there's some players I've seen do it, but it's generally not my advice to go without it. I think it's probably one of the top Prime cores.
Yeah, definitely. I have to give it a must-have. And also to add on top of what you said previously, again, if you use a combiner to, overpowered combiners, especially like Ruination and God Neptune, to destroy buildings, you lose out on that energy as well. So I think that that's another reason why Alpha Trion is such a great core. And yeah, like you said, it's you should avoid putting on squishy bots, but I suppose some healers can be exception to the rule, and I guess you can kind of walk away if you have a beach comber and the Deluge on your team who can kind of protect that squishy bot. So yeah, I generally do agree, but these are some points that I would like to add. Okay, I guess now we have Alchemist next up, and the way I feel it personally, I guess I would put it in optional tier, but the reason why I feel that way is because it gives a lot of benefit to a single bot that does a lot of heavy area damage, especially bots like Optimal Optimus, Transmetal to Megatron, Leo Prime, Predacon Inferno, and especially Optimal Optimus, who is a melee special, who can have problems with AI, who can be a bit suicidal when engaging with the outpost, who can also get your healer to start chasing him, and can also cause your healer to die. So I feel like Alchemist has a lot of value there. But outside of it, I feel like it doesn't have a huge team benefit like something like, again, Alpha Trion. Alpha Trion buffs your entire team, while this one buffs one bot. So I think it's a good core to use, but I feel like it's more of an optional. So how do you see it?
Look, I think I'm in agreement with you. The only thing I'll add is that in the current meta of the game, there's two base types that work well. You have a front-loaded base or a back-loaded base. And I find that particularly in front-loaded bases, where all the defenses hit you as soon as your team drops onto the pad, Alchemist is really good on the squishy gunner,
Yeah.
right? So that's one use case where I've been using him more often, is I often think that as a prime core has a lot of benefit on a bot that you're opening with, and you're really reliant on that. And like, if you think about it, the idea is that these front loads can't use elemental abilities. You can't wash a base quickly. So that means that your gunners need to take time, and between the transformation and then actually landing their abilities, that's anywhere between 4 to 7 seconds, right? So Alchemist, if it does a lot of damage, brings the heal up to parity, gives your healer a break as well, so that your healer can help heal others. Because the thing about, I guess, single healer teams is that if you run a single healer, those area healing even, it's still trying to focus on one bot. And your healer gets really busy trying to switch between a front load, which bot needs the heal. Yeah. So I find Alchemist quite useful, situationally very valuable. I don't think, to your point, I 100% agree. It's probably advantages one bot, but generally it doesn't have the same team benefits overall. But for a team benefit for me on a front load, the gunner is so essential. If you can clean up large areas quickly on a front load, that means that the whole battle becomes quite easy. If you can't, and you lose that gunner who's critical to the cleanup, because that's what gunners are for, right? Gunners are to clean areas up. There's no real other reason to run a gunner other than they can clear areas quite quickly. So for me, that's where Alchemist comes in very nicely.
Yeah, which gunner would you suggest for front loaded? In this case, for Alchemist.
I like using him on Wild Rider, Blue Streak quite a lot. One of the big gunners of the game, I think, for front loads, because you combine them with either Brainstorm, Slipstream. Sorry, I kind of keep using because I play both.
No worries.
I keep changing the names, but yeah, I think Blue Streak, Wild Rider, Brainstorm combo is really good, and with Slipstream. So I think that's one big one for me. Another gunner that I think is very good on is also the gears, etc. So the new gunner, like his G1 doesn't really add that much. His most valuable because his range is so limited, his actual biggest value is actually on front loads to help clear things up. And I've seen some guys in Prime League use gears quite well and quite well in those situations, using Amalgamous, which obviously we have to cover later as well, but or Alchemist. But Alchemist is definitely an option on your gunner class typically. I like on a low health bot for that reason, on those front loads. But I think those two are the really big obvious ones.
Yeah, I feel like it helps with survivability on the gunner, especially with a combat like Nightstick and Fracas and Fireline and Top Shot, who do area damage, and of course they can do, pair very well with it. Okay, so I guess we can move on to the next one, and yeah, that would be Amalgamous. Well, for defense, I feel like it is a must-have for your Twin Twist and Coelagon, but for offense, I feel like it's more of a depending situation because, again, I think there are some issues, but I'd like to hear out how do you feel about it. But the way I feel about it right now, I would go with it probably in the optional, but for offense, of course. But again, I'd like to hear you out. And how do you feel about Amalgamous?
So I think Amalgamous is optional, like you say. I think for me, it's probably similar to Alchemist. I run it on front loads, particularly on Sea Spray Octo Punch, because they spend a lot of time in alt mode, and the electricity isn't an element that's normally blocked very often in the game. So you want someone to clear a good area on a front load, and while taking damage and being able to heal back from that. Amalgamous is quite good for that. I think, to your point, there's probably less bots that actually benefit from it that much. Like if you think about Predacon Inferno, maybe he's a future candidate, because like they're talking about balance or nerfing him, etc. And he might need that extra bit of damage as well as a bit of heal to open up on certain bases, which is what some players do. I think I've seen him used also in sack players who use Twin Twist as part of their sack strategy. They often sack and then bring the outpost down and then use Twin Twist. But again, that's your point. He's already on defense generally with Amalgamous anyway, so that's beneficial. But generally, there's few. There's actually fewer use cases for me of Amalgamous that are as effective.
Yeah, it's a bit of a limited use, but something that now I would like to mention about Amalgamous is that I haven't seen many players use, but I've been playing around lately, and that's putting Amalgamous on Top Spin and Terrormender. I feel like, it's fun. I'm not gonna say it's super meta breaking. I still have to, do a lot more testing with it. But I feel like it's fun because it boosts his damage and there's no other core that does that. And he can hit hard. And in addition, he doesn't spend as much time in his alt mode, but he can, heal a little bit up. So I think that's something interesting that I've been playing around with lately.
Yeah. Impactor was a very popular choice for him for a little while as well, but Impactor's got his G1 core now, but arguably the healing's still very important on Impactor because he's a bot that gets in front, etc. But he's kind of very out of the meta now, unfortunately. I liked Impactor a lot. He's actually one of the reasons I started playing the game. I loved the character. But so he's another example of a bot that could use it. But I've seen it used on Transmetal Megatron, Optimal Optimus at times too, like because he's in the air when he's shooting fire. One of the interesting things I think people don't sometimes notice is that because he's in the air for quite a long time, it's quite actually beneficial to give him that extra healing, to your point, if you try to open with him, which is what some people used to do before sort of all this large AoE came along. So he's an option too that he sits in. I've seen him using Half Shell as another option too. So there's a few options you can, but to your point again, it's like it comes back to what's the team benefit as well. There's not a major team benefit, so unless it's solving a specific battlefield problem, it's not as useful.
Yeah, definitely. Now the next one in line would be Liege Maximo. And this one I can see go both ways, but I personally would lean to a must-have, and the reason why I would lean to a must-have is because it can, first off, it gives the bot that holds it hack immunity, so it can have, you can even put it on a ranged, or even on a ranged bot just to give it hack immunity, but of course it's gonna excel on a melee bot, who will of course be engaging in a direct combat with the outposts and will be able to hack them after they use their ability. So I feel like it has multiple uses, being causing a little bit of mayhem with the outpost, who can also do more damage to the defenses to help you in the long run, and of course give the equipped bot hair immunity. So I would lean towards must have, but I would like to hear you out. How do you feel about that core?
It's an interesting one. Personally, I have not used Liege for a very long time. Like that's despite a lot of people insisting, for example, on a front load base, reversing the outposts, hacking them, and then sending them away is very valuable. But I think for most play styles, I think I play the game quite technically, so I think for a lot of play styles, that relief is very important for them. When you have 15 seconds effectively of outposts after they've used their abilities, typically where they can't attack you, I can 100% get that. It's very valuable. The reason I'm against it is generally because of pathing. So pathing is one of the most critical facets of the game. Like you can have all the meta bots you want, but I've seen players that have, full captain teams or now even general teams. And if you don't path well, it doesn't matter what happens. And so my philosophy with Liege is that you are trying to, it goes against my war philosophy. I think in this game, in war, what you should be controlling is where you fight. You as a player should be looking at the battlefield and go, this is where I anticipate I will fight. Therefore, I will clear the area and make it safe, or I will deal with it. So pushing bots away all of a sudden gets your outposts at times to chase them. And I find that being a pathing problem that I don't like. So every time I've tried Liege, I find that really annoying personally. I'm kind of like, just like, they're walking after a fast-moving bot like Red Alert, for example. Because Red Alert, he'll sprint towards his name because he's with a nightstick, so he'll go. So you've all of a sudden brought you brought your team up much higher level into range of things you don't necessarily want to, and that to me is suboptimal because I'm trying to control the fight in the place that I want to. So that's my philosophy. But I think if I think about how players play generally, is a lot of players play the meta as opposed to play the way I play, and I try to teach players to play. And I think what happens is that relief is just valuable. But for example, what I see that happens is that sometimes what happens is that players will deploy a combiner after outposts hit them. In the current meta, a lot of the outposts are clustered together because they're trying to get Beach to hack onto another outpost, then hack your team. That's a very common defensive attempt right now. So what happens is that you start to hack the bot, and generally the bot is the bot Red Alert is among the bots that are hacked, right? But his ability, halving damage for 50% in that time, is also up. And then the combiner is then also your combiner once deployed, right, means that it's into the hack time, right? So the Liege hack that you initiated, so you're not getting the full real benefit of that. And then at the same time, you've got some people argue, well, my combiner's not been hit by the outposts, right? So but actually, you're in red alert time. So there's still 10 seconds of red alert effect that plays out where you're not getting a full benefit of those outposts hitting the base, and then they're moving to a different position. Whereas generally what I'm trying to do, even when I use combiner, is I'm trying to control when my combiner comes back, so when my combiner dies, where is my team? The place that my team is where I want them to engage outposts typically. And so again, Liege, if they haven't hacked, gives me another problem that I need to think about. So I find that Liege adds, to me, less control because it depends on who gets hacked, who is closest to the bot holding Liege. And to your point, normally that's a melee bot because the melee bot will be the closest to the outposts. But for me, it really runs against how I play. So I can understand for most players who play the meta, it's just simple, right? I can bank on not being pressured straight away. And it's quite good against someone like Red Alert, whose common build is Vector plus Nightstick on defense. So what it does for you is straight away, well, you're hacking a dangerous bot that is halving damage, and he's not able to hit you with Nightstick, which you can't heal from. So that's a benefit for some players. But I think for me, it's optional. But I think for the general population, I would say it's probably mandatory on how most players play. Because of what I've described is they will just, it's less thinking about here I will fight and why I will fight here. And with the order of the prime cores I will take out, defense prime cores I will take out so that I can fight here. But But for other players, it's just like, I'm going to spam ability. And kind of what we touched on a little bit earlier, in a meta where you can smoke half the base with fire, are you really thinking about what Prime Cores do? Do you need to? Not really. Like, if you can break it all down, and that's kind of one of the challenges that we have with this, the balance or the nerfing of Leo that's coming up. It factors into your defensive Prime Cores start to have less meaning if players can wipe out whole areas of them, which is why we've seen such a shift to front or backloaded bases where you can force a fight either really low or really high.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, and I think another reason the issue again to touch upon is the pathing, and yeah, it can cause a problem, especially if players do not, for example, in top loaded or backloaded, yeah. If you do not get rid of the kill zone in time, especially Shieldgen cluster, I suppose, yeah, it can, if you hack outpost, I guess it can lead your own bots into a trap. So I can see the points, and okay, I will end up giving it optional, because I do understand points, because I think, yeah, it is more about if player feels comfortable using the core. It can have benefits if you feel comfortable, but okay, yeah, due to that reason, I guess I will end up with optional. Now, I think we have another core that might not be as optional, and I guess that would be Micronus. So, it provides free healing, and it is flexible from the point. Now, I personally prefer it on more ranged bots, and the reason why is because all melee bots in my team have some form of survivability. Pipes is nearly unkillable. If I use Beachcomber, he's nearly unkillable, and so on. So basically, there I feel like ranged bots, they could use from the healing, my gunners. So I guess I do prefer it there, and personally I have it on Leo Prime currently, because he doesn't need G1 in the current meta game now before the nerf, because he does stupid high amount of damage, and he's at long range, because I do not use melee, because I think melee causes problems for pathing purposes. So I feel like this one would have to end up being in a must-have, and also I feel like it makes your healer have less, it puts less pressure on the healer. So yeah, how do you feel about Micronus?
Oh, it's absolutely one of the core Prime cores. I think in the meta with this amount of damage, area healing is very important. It's also why Alpha Trion Tarn was quite popular for a little while as well. It's still some players in Prime League use it because he's got such a wide area of healing. So wide area of healing is just it's so valuable, because it's a uniform level of healing that affects the whole squad. Generally, good players will path their team together, so everyone in that circle is getting that healing, as opposed to the splash heal. The splash heal is still a percentage heal that goes to a small area around the block. So I can't fathom playing without it. I've seen some players play without it, but I just think that I think you're right. A lot of it is more like survivability via the shields that we have now. I see people using J's, Shield Drawn. So the shields with the Micronus component help a lot. Yes, I definitely think it's a mandatory Prime Core. I just can't see warring without it. Even a lot of the back end, the backdoor type players that use the Cup, Springer, Dead End, Astro Train combination to clean up a base from the back, they'll have Micronus on them. It's just such a core aspect of the game that you need healing. And it's actually one of the interesting things about Arc and Nemesis was that the acid that came in negated that. Like it actually is a counter. Like acid on defense, we need more of it, I believe. I think it's such a good counter to have and forces players to think carefully about it. It's also what makes, for example, Red Alert quite dangerous on defense. Right? You can have Micronus spinning still on a tank, but actually it's not helping that much because he's cancelling the healing. Yeah. So yeah, I think though that Micronus, it was deliberately having a bot that can be on defense, right, and building Nightstick with acid helps to negate the attacking power of Micronus, because that's what it is. It gives your attacking team a protection to go do whatever it wants.
Yeah, and I also see, then that you mentioned Alpha Trion and Tarn, the G1 core is basically a Micronus, so stacking that with Micronus and with now with Metroplex and Triptychon being more popular, and with their Rejuvenate passive you get almost 7% healing every 5 seconds. For nothing, for just waiting. So I feel like you can really stack up a significant amount of survivability. So yeah, I guess the Micronus would definitely have to go in a must-have. Now, another core that is not very flashy, like Alpha Trion, it doesn't destroy everything, would be Nexus Prime. And I feel like, personally, it should definitely go into the must-have, because it's a super steroid for your Urination, for your God Neptune, for every other combiner, and it makes your team deal a lot more easily with the enemy combiner. So how do you see Nexus? Do you agree with it being in the must-have, or?
I generally say it's a must-have for most players. I personally don't feel I need it a lot, but I think for a lot of players that are combiner dependent, right, it's absolutely necessary. It also helps you with reducing timeouts as well, as we're moving into a phase of the game where timeouts with the 5-star Metroplex is going to be more relevant. Having Nexus is one component of actually moving through the battlefield faster. So I think it's mandatory for a lot of players. To give perspective for me on how I approach a battlefield is, because the way that I like to play with my combiner is I actually like to just move it. I like to move my team to a place I want to deploy combiner. And what happens is I also don't like my combiner lasting too long, because most of the solutions for war are within my team. I actually don't need the combiner to do that. What I'm often wanting to do is use my combiner to take time off the field from special abilities. So I've just been, for example, if Optimal Optimus is about to hit my healers, etc., I want to just deploy my combiner as a quick break from that, or there's been a small split in my team. If a split happens in my team, what I'll do is I'll move I don't want my gunners or my healers exposed. I want my tanks to be at the front. So what I want is I typically move my combiner to where the tanks will be after my combiner dies. And then what happens is, as part of that, I want my combiner to die fairly quickly. I don't like my combiner lasting a long time, because your combiner can't take down an adaptive shielding HQ, right? So often what I see for a lot of players in war is they time out. My whole team was alive is what you often hear in frustration. Like, I don't know why I lost, why I timed out. And it's because when you deploy a combiner and it's up too long, right? Like if you can stun the outpost, etc., they're not doing a lot. Like Beach, for example, is the classic example of someone like timing out against, because they deploy they deploy the combiner when Beach is like half damaged, and then your combiner though does zero, very little damage to Beach. And what happens in that time is Beach is also healing, right? So all of a sudden, you're in that time, you have 40 seconds, a minute pass of this combiner being up, not being able to really kill Beach, and taking very little damage from Beach. And as a result, you end up timing out. So for me, a Nexus Prime core, making my combiner last longer increases some risk for me. So I'm very comfortable. I think, as I've alluded to, I'm very comfortable with my playstyle and not relying on that. But that's kind of my perspective. And what I worry about for players as we enter this, new meta, is that a lot of players are going to time out deploying a combiner late in a back-end base, because that's where most of the problems are. On a backloaded basis, all the prime cores, all the key assets are up at the top. You deploy your combiner late, and then what happens is, yes, you destroy a couple of things, but then you've soaked up a lot of time, because the combiner himself is slowed down by Metroplex's slowdown ability. So for me, I do see some danger in that. And I've seen players time out for that, and kind of why I've adapted my play style. I do have it as an option within my war teams that I can equip him, but I actually don't think he's as essential for me, because, as I said, like I plan war. Can my team do the job is what I look at most of the time. If I'm relying combiner, I don't think it's a good war team. So it means that, as how important my combiner? Probably not as much. And I'm trying him to die fast at times, because I don't want him to eat up time on the clock.
Yeah, and that's also another reason why I enjoy using Sky Rain and Galvatronus on bottom loaded, because they will be alive for maybe 20 seconds. When you cast their ability, they will be unkillable for 10 seconds, and then maybe 10 more if they survive. And this is where I see also Nexus, because it increases his damage and it kind of helps him do some cleanup to some problematic buildings. So I guess it really depends on the situation and on the player, because a lot of them are using combiners as a crutch. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a not maybe. I think calling it double-edged sword in this case may be a bit of an overstatement, but I understand the cons that you see with it. But I feel like a lot of players have it. The combiner is a crutch for them, definitely, especially when Nation got Neptune. So yeah, I do understand the using it, but I understand the cons. Now we have Prima, which you obviously want to use with a weapon that hits in an area. And yeah, I feel like, now that we talked about Beachcomber as well, I feel like Prima, when you help, when you just deal more damage to such bulky things, I feel like you would probably have to call it a must-have, because it gives 3 damage increase for the entire squad. Um, Again, you want it on an area weapon like Nightstick and Fracas, Top Shot and Fireline. Kind of, I could see some use with Styler and Sunbeam if they are 5-star, because they do cast this area skill that has a fairly decent uptime of area effect. But of course, the first 2 that I mentioned are definitely the safest choices. Also, there is, Flake and Crater Maker, who will, as Dale said, will be buffed, in fact, with the upcoming balance patch, in a sense that they will scale off of ranks and perks and everything, so they will do even more damage. And of course, we have Peacemaker and Tip Top, who are kind of Flake side grade. So yeah, there are definitely some guns that work with it. And again, it helps deal more damage basically it's free damage for the entire squad. And it can, we can stack it with other things like the damage boost from Arc and Nemesis skill, damage boost from Inferno, and things like that. So I would have to lean to must have, but of course I would like to hear you out. How do you feel about Prima?
I think you've covered it all. I have very little to add. I think it's, for all the reasons you've said, it's very valuable. The only combat that I think some people sometimes don't think about with Prima is also Lancelot and Buzzstrike. Because he happens at a high frequency on a straight line, it means that pretty much everything he's hitting in front of him cops Prime. So that's another useful way to try to fit him in into the team as well. So it just gives you lots of options. But I tend to agree with you. I tend to think it belongs on a gunner, because a gunner with a good spread, I think, is the best.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also curious about, because Beige Breaker will also be buffed, like Dale said, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, and I would like to see it on that as well. But we'll get to that when he actually gets buffed. But for now, I think that pretty much covers it. Now we have Quintus. And honestly, the Quintus does so much, when you do area destruction. The sharks can provide both protection and damage. They can provide they can distract enemy bots. I would have to lean towards must-have. I think that Quintus really helps in all aspects, again, and damage and survivability, but of course. And a lot of players like it with Pteroxodon and Pterodactyl to help improve the survivability of some other bots, but I feel like even that, it's cool. But for example, what I've been enjoying recently is Quintus on my pipes, who has Forge of Solus, and it's very unconventional, but I find, it's fun because I can just, because of Pipes goes wherever I want him to go, I can control where I want sharks to go, so I can just form outposts, and then my gunners in the behind can be safely just pick them down with, with a lot of damage, because I have, Prima, Cosmic Rust Blaster, Nightsticks and all that, to do a lot of passive damage. So I would have to lean towards a must-have, but of course, how do you feel about it?
I'm with you as well, must-have. I think for all the reasons you've said, only other thing that he does really well is he helps your team avoid hacks. So if you think about Cosmos, you think about Peacemaker that have come along, Tip Top, right? They all basically can hack your team quite dangerously. And one of the things is that because the way hacking works on a lot of these is it bypasses bots with hack immunity. So if you think about that, a lot of people love Forge of Solus that has hack immunity. All right, people like to run Liege Prime Core. Again, if the hack bypasses your tanks who normally have those cores, it's going to go to your gunners or your medics. That's disastrous in a battle.
Yeah.
So Quintus becomes very valuable in those little sharks that it's spawning to cover your team. And I think people underestimate its value. I think you touched on Terrax, and I've done the maths on this, and I've tested it, but Terrax and Quintus is not as good as people think it is. It's not the bee's knees that everyone says it is from a maths engine. Next time people play, you can test it out to look at the heal. Yes, it does work. They do get additional heal, but the thing is that its heal is commensurate to where the sharks are spawned, right? Yeah. If all the resources buildings are up front, right, then you're not spawning a lot of sharks up top. So it means that when you're up top and you're actually facing on a backload, the bases, all the defenses there, Quintax isn't providing much heal. right? It's only going to spawn 1 or 2 sharks when you destroy a defense also on the up. Even on a front load, it's quite valuable, because there's so much hitting you. If you can distract, things from it, then it's very valuable. So I think it doesn't require the heal. And I think one of the things that I often think about is one of the biggest battlefield problems, as we've touched on, is red alert with nightstick.
Yeah.
Like Terrax doesn't help in that case. Like
No.
healing isn't really going to help you. So you're actually better off with a shield, in my opinion, because the shield is half in the damage on the tanks typically.
Yeah.
Or half or a third depending on the choice of shield that you use. And that outstrips, if you do the math, it outstrips anything that that Terrax might be healing you from. Because if Terrax is typically on a warrior doesn't have high damage.
Yeah.
Like he's not going to heal you a lot. And so I think, again, so for me, one of the things that's interesting, being quite nerdy about this, I look at the maths often, and I find that Quintus is key, Terrax not so much. And there's other good choices for that. I think you can use it, don't get me wrong. I just think people overstate the power. Obviously, as they say, you can't kill them. You can't kill typically the bot holding Quintus because they have sharks coming from them.
Yes.
That's why it's hard to kill. Like you can put it on a gunner, and it'll make the gunner hard to kill as well, because the gunner is not taking damage, the sharks are. People don't understand that kind of Quintus itself is what makes bots high. So it's not Terrax, it's Quintus core. And having it at the front of the team, I think is very important as well, because what's the point of the game? The core of the game is tanks at the front, gunners, then medics.
Yeah,
or
definitely.
high DPS, really. So where do you want the sharks? At the front of the team, because it means your tanks need less healing. And you have a number of times I always love seeing red alert hitting the sharks, not my team. For example, it's great because I'm like, it's just buying me time to wear out that 10 seconds and then deal with him.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, pretty much why also, why I said that I like it on Forge of Souls, because I do not want to limit myself to the Omnipotent, because healing is complementary, but it's not really as, it's definitely overrated. Yeah, and now next one in line would be Megatronus, and due to how popular fireproof cores are, you have 2 fireproof cores on average, and considering it only works in melee range, I would have to put it on optional. Personally, I think it was awesome on pipes before fireproof and antidote became so super popular. You could just give pipes something like Bastrak and Lancelot, and he could really cause problems. He's nearly unkillable, so he's gonna do a lot of damage passively. He's gonna have, acid and fire, they're gonna pair well for additional damage. And I would if you have Megatronus, of course, I would argue you should put it on a bot that will survive, because a living bot will do more damage than a dead bot. Because you have to put it on a melee, you just have to put it on a melee because it works only in melee range. So, but yeah, due to those reasons, I feel like it's optional in the current metagame. Mainly because there is so much fireproof, cutting down the damage that it deals. And of course antidote is also, you usually may see one antidote. Sure, you can get rid of it, but I feel like it's more of an optional core. But how do you see it?
I think for me it's not even optional. I think it's just a core not to waste your time with. I think it takes up a space that another prime core has a benefit to the squad. There's not enough advantage added from it, because it's typically, if at 45% on typically a melee bot, right? If it's not special class, that's not a lot of damage.
Yeah,
it's quite small actually. So I tend to think it's actually kind of a waste of a prime core. I think in the previous meta, when there was less area damage, trying to boost your damage, it was kind of good for that, and combining with the pipes acid like you touched on. But right now, I just don't see it having any value at all.
Yeah, definitely. The damage is too low. And like you said, it only affects one bot, and it's not even that much of an effect. And the problem, special class, while they have high attack, they have low survivability, while tanky bots like pipes, they have low attack but high survivability. So it's a bit of it's a bit wonky, but definitely optional. Next one in line would be Vector, and he's definitely must have for defense. For defense, for your red alert and your run amok, definitely want them to resurrect. But when it comes to offense, I can see the most value in it in terms of sacrifice strategy, which I would consider optional. But of course, again, I do feel like there is more to Vector than just limiting it to sacrifice strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I think it tends to be more optional. I think there's certain play styles with single healer where it's very good as an option in your tank, where you can throw your tank away basically and allow him to take a lot of damage, but situation take out a mine as well or something like that. I think he's useful, but I don't think it's as mandatory as other prime cores.
Yeah, definitely. Going to the optional. Now we have only two left, and I think they will take too long. We have Onyx, and I would lean towards optional. I do have some, I see some value in it that I see players don't really use. And yeah, first thing is it can make your bots like Afterbreak and Flameform more survivable. Who, yeah, usually you will use Vector on them, but in some cases, if it's a huge kill zone, you may want to use Onyx. And also, something that fell on my mind lately is putting them on a warrior. For example, like Ariel, Scylla, Inferno, and Rodimus Unicronus. Because once Onyx procs, even if you heal back up, Onyx will stay. And in addition, if you pair it with, for example, Jace and Barrow, that damage reduction stacks. This is, I think Onyx gives 37% damage reduction,
Yeah.
and Jace and Barrow give 20 on level 10, 23 on level 11. So if it's level 11, you will have at all times 60% damage reduction in alongside the healing from Jace and Barrow, for example. So I feel like it's optional, but I think there are some ways where we can just cheese it out and make a bot that is not intended to be tanky to make it very tanky.
Look, I agree with you. There's a lot of benefits to Onyx. I've wanted to use it, but I think the challenge that as a player you have with Onyx is you need to plan for the effect to kick in, and that's
Yeah.
not easy. It's work. Like when am I going to get my bot to down to 40% of their health? Like it's a very precise thing
Yeah.
to get your bot into danger to go. I'm not going to heal him to activate the prime core benefit. Like obviously, if you get into a bad situation and then you heal back up from it, great. But unfortunately, it's not that straightforward for me. Like to get the Onyx benefit, and I think that's the problem with the prime core on attack. Like it's just hard to have a guaranteed benefit, which is what we've talked about a lot of these other prime cores. Is like you get that benefit, basically as soon as you're in play.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, how do you time such a thing? And like, as good as you might any player might be, no one likes to have a frontline tank at below 40%. You want them at 60 to 70, really above half most of the time. And to get down to 40 can be dicey.
Yeah, it can be risky, but yeah, definitely optional in regards to that. And our last one would be Solus. We touched upon it a bit recently. And I think Solus, the core design has potential, especially as we have seen it on defense. But on offense, I think just numbers, the values are just too low. If they just up the numbers, I feel like it could be more valuable. But currently, I cannot see, optional. Maybe I would put it even below optional, but for the sake of it, I'm just gonna put it, at the end of optional. And yeah, again, it spawns a turret, but turret just doesn't do much. Its health is low, its damage is low, doesn't do much. So yeah, I feel like it's optional to the point. It's it's very optional. Yeah, very passable.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing, right? Like if it's optional, and we've talked about some really key prime cores, right, in a squad, you're not going to it's hard to make in a war team an optional prime core work because you often then have to compete with G1s that you need for certain bots
Yeah,
as well. And like for a lot of new bots now, what's interesting, a lot of the new bots that have been released, a lot of them rely on their G1. Like I love Iron Bison Lightspeed, but if I'm using it, I need the G1. So all of a sudden, you lose a spot for a prime core. So Solus just doesn't have a home,
yeah,
and that's why I think it's got to you got to be very hard critical and go which are my top prime cores, and we've named a few. I think if I from memory, I think we're saying 5 mandatory, like essential prime cores.
yeah,
Then you're going like, well, there's not a lot left after that. Like there's only a squad of 8. Most of the other bots will need, if you're using air class, need some form of EO. Right? Gunners, if they don't have their own core, will generally need VM.
yeah,
Right. So, basically, you have 2 gunners minimum. Most gunners are either their G1 core or a VM. It's not going to be a prime core.
definitely.
So it gets very tricky to try to fit more in. And I think Solus is junk at the current level. It needs a buff to actually be relevant.
Yeah, definitely. Because we have something like, for example, a Prima Star Saber who spawns a decoy with basically 100% of bot stats. Solus is a core that applies 35% stats, for example. So I think if they'd have to up Solus to something like 100% to really to really be considered. And even then, I feel like it would be optional in the end. I think the site has potential, but I think that's pretty much where it ends, you know. So yeah. Well, yeah, that covers all the Prime cores. Yeah, like you said, there are 5 in the must-have that we concluded, being Alpha Trion, Micronus, Nexus, Prima, and Quintus. This is definitely a hefty video, and thank you for finding time to discuss the Prime cores with me, because a lot of people have been asking me about the Prime cores, and I really wanted to discuss it with another player who is very dedicated to the top tier wars. And of course, I hope this will help all the viewers gain a little bit of a better and deeper understanding of those Prime cores. What do they do? Perhaps you can apply what we've talked about in the video to kind of try to think of your own strategies, maybe something we have missed. You know, players tend to completely miss certain things, so you know, the more, you know, the 2 heads are smarter than 1, basically. So yeah, that's pretty much how I would conclude this video. And again, thank you, Rivet, for participating in regards to this video for the Prime cores, and thank you everyone who stayed until the end. I'll see you in the next one.